Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. I want to talk tonight a little bit about aging, about Alzheimer's, about dementia, about old age, etc. Certainly in the news, given what's happening in politics in the United States, but I think also very importantly in the news in Canada because of the change in our population demographic makeup. Where, according to an article that our guest was quoted in, there's going to be far more proportion of our population that are going to be over the age of 65 and even over the age of 80 in the future than there have been in the past. Our guest is Dr. Samir Sinha. He is the director of geriatrics at the Sinai at Mount Sinai University and the University Health Network. He's been recently appointed the Peter and Sheila Godso Chair in Geriatrics at Mount Sinai Hospital. In 2012, he was appointed by the Government of Ontario to serve as the expert lead of Ontario Seniors Strategy, and he's also an assistant professor in the Department of Medicine, Family and Community Medicine and the Institute of Health Policy, Management and Evaluation at the University of Toronto, and also an assistant professor of medicine at the Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine. I'm very jealous because not only did he graduate from Western University, which I did. He was in medicine, I was in business, but he was a Rhodes Scholar, which I was not. I tried to be a Rhodes Scholar, but I didn't make it. You did, so congratulations, sir. And you went on to a master's in medical history and doctorate in sociology at the University of Oxford Institute of Aging. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Brian.
Our pleasure, my pleasure. So tell me, sir, you've been quoted in the paper quite a bit. You've been making presentations on aging, on dementia, on Alzheimer's. Tell me a little bit, if you could, about sort of where we are in research today about dealing with Alzheimer's and dementia. Are there new things that we have been finding, that you've been finding, that we should be aware of?
Well, the biggest thing that we know about dementia right now is that the number one risk factor, as you mentioned, is age. As our population ages, there are more people who are going to be leading longer lives. And with age, we know that's the biggest risk factor for developing dementia. So right now, we have about 500,000 Canadians living with dementia, and that's about out of 7.5 million Canadians 65 and older. But soon, within a decade, 1 in 4 Canadians is going to be 65 and older.
One in four.
1 in 4. And we know that we're also going to find that a number of Canadians will be 85 and older. And so the number of Canadians who are at risk of living with dementia is going to increase. In fact, we think by 2030, about 1 million Canadians will be living with dementia. And by 2050, 1.7 million Canadians will be living with dementia, but mainly because there's going to be more and more of us who are living in older ages where we see more dementia occurring. But, you were asking, what is the latest that we're learning about dementia? The good news is that a lot of dementia is actually preventable. And I think that's a key message I want your listeners to hear tonight, is that there are actually a number of things that we can do to keep our brains healthy and well. And a lot of advances we've been making over the past few decades in terms of making sure that we better manage our cholesterol or our blood pressures are keeping our brains healthier and preventing many of us from developing dementia. So the more we get the word out about things we can do to prevent dementia, we know that it'll lessen the burden. But the reality is there will still be many Canadians living with dementia, and that there's more that we need to be doing to make sure they can still live healthy and independent lives for as long as possible in our communities.
Cholesterol, I sort of understood, was an issue in regards to the heart. How does it have an impact on the brain?
Well, think about, in your brain, right? How do you get oxygen up to your brain? Well, it's your blood flow. So, when you think about, keeping a healthy heart, think about keeping a healthy brain. We need to make sure that oxygen travels around our bodies. Our oxygen travels in our red blood cells that travel through our arteries and into our brains, just as they do through the other parts of our body. And when you actually maintain good heart health, if we say it that way, when you maintain good vascular health, making sure that those pipes that you have throughout your body are not clogged up with junk, for example, then you're making sure that you actually have good circulation, and you keep a healthy brain, you keep a healthy heart. That's why we say that when you have things like really high cholesterol, for example, that starts to create junk along the edges of those pipes. If you actually have really, really high blood pressure that's not well controlled, it can cause those pipes to stiffen in our bodies as well. That's why we're learning now that if you have high blood pressure, getting under control will help you prevent dementia, will prevent heart disease, will prevent strokes, but will also keep your brain healthy. And in a similar way, if you have high cholesterol, again, something you can do, but there's other things you can do to protect your brain. If you're hard of hearing, for example, it's good to get your hearing checked, but it's also to make sure that you get your hearing fixed, for example, because if your brain isn't actually getting that sensory information that comes through hearing what's around you, then your brain isn't getting information that keeps it active and engaged, and that can actually be a risk factor for dementia. Also, the more we get educated about things in our lives, the longer we spend in school, the more we spend time learning, we build new connections in our brains, and that actually becomes a protective factor against dementia. So that's why it's important to encourage kids to finish high school, for example. It's important that if you start having hearing loss, you get it fixed, for example. And if you're at risk for high blood pressure, high cholesterol, or heart disease, it's good to make sure that you're maintaining a good, healthy brain as well.
So let's talk about cholesterol for a second. I think there's been a lot of sort of changed thinking on cholesterol, hasn't there been? Maybe 10 years ago, I was told don't eat red meat and don't eat eggs or something like this. And then someone else told me your body's just creating tons and tons of cholesterol. And so therefore I had to go on statins. So what's the current thinking in regards to cholesterol? Is it diet? Is it exercise? Is it statins? What's the solution?
I think the key thing is the one thing I want your listeners to appreciate is moderation is key. I think we've grown up in kind of a society of extremes where we've heard that sugar is evil, cholesterol and fat are evil, for example. And so I sometimes have patients coming into my office and they feel like they're only eating cardboard because that's the only thing that's safe to eat, for example. And the key is like everything in moderation is important. So when it comes to cholesterol, it's important that we actually get dietary cholesterol because cholesterols are important types of fat that we use in brain and other and other body kind of functions and development as well. So there's what we call good cholesterols, there's bad cholesterols, and the key thing is to make sure that we have things in moderation. So it's not that you can't eat anything with fat or you can't have eggs or anything like that. Yeah, you can have red meat, you can have eggs and that. You don't want to overdo things. But we also know that some people have conditions that no matter how healthy they eat, their cholesterol levels might still be really high. And so that's where, especially if you have an underlying issue like heart disease, if you might have diabetes, that's where we might also say, look, your cholesterol's higher than we can just manage with dietary controls. So we might need to put you on a medication to try and keep your cholesterol from getting a bit too high and getting into a troubling zone where it can start clogging those pipes and causing risks like future heart attacks or strokes, or even things like dementia as well. Same thing with blood pressure, right? We don't want your blood pressure to be too low. We don't want your blood pressure to be high. We want you to have a normal, reasonable blood pressure as well. And so it's one of those sorts of things where I like to say that it's not that you should have a sugar-free diet, a fat-free diet. It's okay to eat sugar. It's okay to eat fat. It's okay to eat salt, but you want to make sure that you're keeping things in moderation and working with your primary care provider to say, how am I doing? Do I need to, be a bit more, put a bit more control on these things? Or do I need medications to try and help regulate things because I can't do it just on my own?
I have spoken to numerous people lately that have said the most important thing they've done is given up alcohol. What about alcohol?
Again, alcohol is something I say in moderation, right? Again, if people have problems with alcohol, probably good to stay from it, or make sure that you're doing something where you've got family and friends around you who can make sure that you're keeping things in moderation. So right now, we basically say that for men, they shouldn't be having more than 14 drinks a week or 2 drinks a day, for example. For women, we say that basically no more than on average 1 drink a day or 7 drinks a week. That doesn't mean that you can have all of them together on the same day, 14 on a, like we don't, again, it's all about moderation. So it's not that we say no alcohol, but we say basically if you're drinking alcohol, just to, consume it in moderation and know what healthy limits are. Because when you have too much alcohol on board, it can lead to other problems. It can affect your brain health as well. It can affect a lot of different functions. And that's why it's important, again, to think about these things in moderation. The only things I say an absolute no to are smoking. There's nothing good that comes of smoking. There's nothing about moderating your smoking. It's that if you're smoking, you should stop. That's the one hard no that I would give. But everything else, I'd say, think about it in moderation. And if you're not sure, talk to your primary care provider about what you can do to make healthier choices.
Is it healthy to be on a statin for the rest of one's life? Are there side effects from being on statins with daily intake?
Yeah, so every medication basically has risks and benefits, for example. So, for example, if you're a person who has abnormally high cholesterol, and if you have underlying conditions, for example, that put you at increased risk of heart attacks or strokes or other things like that, then you might be a candidate for a statin, for example. But, one thing that I always talk to my patients about is making sure that we're right sizing their medications. So you might be put on a statin, and then the question becomes are you on the right dose? Do we need to lower the dose with time? And sometimes we actually say the statin is no longer useful in a particular person's case. So we might take the person off the statin. So I wouldn't say that go on a statin. It's great. It's safe, because there are side effects with statins as well. We know that some people will actually develop severe muscle cramps and aches, for example. Other people will have inflammation of their liver. Sometimes prolonged use of statins in certain people can increase their risk of diabetes. So these medications, while they have some benefits, can also have some risks. And they only really have benefits in people who actually need to be on them. And not everyone that we might have prescribed statins on in the past still need to be on them. So that's why with every single person that I work with, I try and look at kind of what their situation is. Is a statin right for them or not? If it's not right for them, we get them off of it. If it is right for them, are they on the right dose? Usually I have to lower the dose because it's usually too high in the case of many of my older, frailer patients. And some cases I find people who are not on a statin, and it's not clear why they're not on a statin, so we'll start one on them. So again, it's about making sure that we're taking every person into account in terms of their risk factors and thinking about the risks and the benefits of using medications like statin. But I wouldn't tell anybody, yeah, go ahead, go on a statin, go on a cholesterol for the fun of it. No, in certain people, it'll be helpful. In other people, it won't be helpful at all. In fact, it might actually cause more harm than good.
So I've been on 3 different statins. Is that normal to have different statins prescribed over time, trying to find the right one?
Again, everyone's different, and obviously I'm not your physician, so I can't really comment on why you might have been on different ones. But some people don't tolerate a particular statin well, so it may make sense to try something else, for example. But again, some people, if they don't react well to them, then it tells us that maybe they shouldn't be on a statin because there might be more risks than benefits, and we might look at other cholesterol lowering agents that exist as well.
So we've talked about 14 drinks a week, and just kidding, and doing everything in moderation. We've talked about statins. I want to turn to some of the financial issues, and then also some of the activity issues. We're going to take a break for some messages and be back in just 2 minutes with our physician, Dr. Samir Sinha from Mount Sinai University and the University of Toronto Medical School in just 2 minutes, talking about dementia, about aging, about getting older, about the impact on our society and how and what we need to do to deal with it. Stay with us, everybody. We're back in 2 minutes. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. We're talking about aging, and our guest is Dr. Samir Sinha. He's the Director of Health Policy Research. He's at Mount Sinai University. He's also a professor at University of Toronto Medical School. You were quoted in an article a couple months ago in regards to what you said about 1 in 4 individuals are going to be over the age of 65. And that article was interesting because it said that a third of the people over the age of 65 didn't think they had the money to retire. And financial capability ends up being a real issue, and referenced other countries such as Japan and Germany that have a super aged society. What do you think we need to do from a societal standpoint and from a personal standpoint to deal with this financial issue?
Like there's a lot of things there that we should unpack. Number one is we define super age societies. First of all, Brian, is societies where one in five people, or about 20% of the population, is 65 and older. And Canada is about to join countries like Italy and Japan as a super age country within the next year. But within 10 years, 1 in 4 Canadians will be 65 and older, and that's what our population is going to look like, during our 2030s and 2040s as well. So we're a rapidly aging society, and the key is that as we get older, for example, as we've just been talking earlier, we know that there's an increased risk of living with things like dementia. And it's harder after you get older, for example, to stay in the labor force, for example. So by that point, people are, entering that retirement period, hoping to have a sustained period of good health. But if you develop something like dementia, or if you need more support and care at home, people are starting to worry about, have I saved up enough, not only to live, beyond the age of 65, but if I have care needs, have I actually saved up to meet those needs as well? And so this is one of the challenges that people are starting to realize now, that, hey, if you make it to 65 in our society, you probably have about 20 years of life expectancy ahead of you. And have you saved enough to last that long? Because there are a growing number of people who are worried about outliving their savings, especially with the cost of living going up, rents going up, and the risk that if you have a condition like dementia, you may have to actually buy extra support, to be able to live independently in the community, or if you need to move into a retirement home. These are costs that could be quite significant, and a lot of people haven't really thought through what that future could look like, and therefore what those costs could be. So I think a lot of people are getting a reality check now, and that's why we're trying to do a lot of work to help remind people about thinking that you might live a long life. You may want to think about what those costs could be associated with a longer life, and things that you can do to help protect yourself financially in the future as well.
Mandatory age of retirement being 65, as you mentioned in the article, was done away with long ago. What do you recommend to people? Should they keep working after 65, or should they retire? And what's happened to that dream of 55 and I can retire?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think we've heard a lot about, in the past, this idea of freedom 55. And I think certainly, I mean, everybody's circumstances are going to be different. So some people might say, look, I'm 65 now, and I've had a good career. I've saved up a lot of funds, and I should be financially secure for as long as I might live. And that's great. But there are some people who are going to look at the age of 65 and say, I don't think I've got enough to last me another 20 years, depending on what their lifestyle might entail, or what unforeseen healthcare costs might include. And so these are folks, for example, who may be able to stay and remain in the workforce. And we know more and more people over 65, since we ended mandatory retirement. Record numbers of older people are staying in the labor force, maybe on a full-time, part-time basis, because they have no choice. There are other people who just enjoy working, and so they're more than happy to stay in the labor force. But there are also other people who may not be able to continue working. They might have workplace injuries or other issues that just don't allow them to do that. And that's why we really want to start thinking proactively about how we can support people earlier on in their careers, to start thinking about financial decisions, and thinking about how they might, how long they might live, and what are the financial decisions they can make. And one of the pieces of advice we're reminding people, especially when they get into their early 60s, for example, is that people may have heard about the Canada Pension Plan and old age security. you can start claiming that as early as 60 years of age. And some people say, great, I'm eligible. I can take it as early as 60. Free money, great, right? But people don't know that if you actually delay taking your CPP, for example, until you can delay it till the age of 70 to start collecting it, or your old age security, if you just delay your CPP, collecting your Canada pension plan, such as living on other savings and then delaying your Canada pension plan, you will get 40% more on a monthly basis after the age of 70 than you would have if you started to claim it at age 65. So I think a lot of people don't know about things that they can do to actually help them have more financial security in their later lives, because most Canadians start claiming their CPP, for example, by 65 or even earlier. Only about 1% of Canadians delay taking their CPP by 70. But for those who do, they're going to have 40% more per month, especially when, remember, if you make it to 65 in our society, you're probably going to be living on average till about 85 years of age. So these are just some things that we want people to know about, so that they can make better financial decisions that might mean that they don't have to actually stay working or struggling to make ends meet when they're like, God, why didn't someone just tell me something like that that could allow me to actually, have a more comfortable retirement?
Sorry, what was the percentage of people that delay receiving pensions until they're 70?
Only 1%.
Only 1%, and yet you're saying it's financially smart to do so.
It's absolutely financial. And I'm not, this is not something that I'm making up, right? The government of Canada, like, will actually lay it all out for people. Most people just say, oh, 65, I can take it. Some people know they can take it as early as 60. But again, just by simply delaying taking your CPP by 70, you can actually have a much higher payout, for example. And that's not special treatment for some. It's just that the longer you delay taking that, the more the money grows, and the more you'll be entitled to.
My mother always used to use that line that I think lots of people have talked about in regards to you don't stop dancing when you get old when you stop dancing. And she referred to it as bridge. She said, you don't get old, you don't stop playing bridge when you get old when you stop playing bridge. And her answer was that something that was mentally demanding and social at the same time is the best thing to do to keep your mind active. What do you think of that, sir?
She's absolutely right. I mean, I think the key is that if we tie all this back to kind of how can I actually prevent dementia, for example, how can I stay healthy and independent for as long as possible? We know that in studies that have actually looked at what actually allows people to live 5 years longer, beyond the age of 75 than people, than other people, we know that these three things actually matter, which is number one, maintaining some level of physical activity. Number two, not smoking. And number three, having some meaningful social interactions with others, for example. So staying socially connected, staying physically active. These are some of the things that we can know can actually prevent things like loneliness and social isolation. It can prevent dementia, and it can also prevent depression as well. And so this is why it's not only important to, think about your physical health and well-being, managing your blood pressure, managing your hearing, managing your cholesterol, but also thinking about your social well-being too, making sure that you're staying socially connected, staying socially engaged, and finding a purpose, right? Whether it might be remaining in the workforce, continue to work. It might be volunteering. It might be being an active member in your family or your community. We know that people who actually have a sense of purpose, are staying socially connected, and being active, whether that's playing bridge, whether that's, volunteering, whatever it is, those people are likely going to live longer, healthier, and happier lives overall. And that's why it's important to think about those things and take them seriously as we age as well.
Do these brain apps and puzzles and games work? Are they helpful?
I think these brain apps and puzzles are things that are helpful at making you better at brain apps and puzzles. I think what's actually more helpful is actually getting out there in the community, engaging with other people, stimulating the brain, doing things. I think we don't really have evidence to say that doing brain games is going to protect your brain from dementia, but what we know will protect your brain from dementia is staying socially active and engaged with others. And if it's around doing games or puzzles with other people, people, great. But we know that just doing those games on their own in isolation are not necessarily going to protect your brains from dementia. That's why we're saying staying physically active, staying socially active, and watching and minding our health. These are all the things that can help us stay healthy and independent for as long as possible.
You've not used the word Alzheimer's, and I've heard that Alzheimer's is now thought of as sort of a continuation or an extreme form of dementia. Can you define dementia, Alzheimer's, what the difference is? Is there a difference? Is one not used anymore, etc.?
No, it's a great question, Brian. So when we think about dementia, dementia basically means a memory or thinking problem that's interfering with our ability to do our day-to-day tasks. But when you start thinking about, well, what causes dementia? Well, there are multiple different causes and diseases. Alzheimer's disease is the most common type of dementia. It's a specific type of dementia that's caused by the buildup, we think, of proteins in the brain. We also have other types of dementia. People might have heard of Lewy body dementia, Parkinson's-related dementia, frontal temporal dementia. There's vascular dementias, for example. So there are a number of different things that can cause dementias. Alzheimer's is the most common type of dementia, Alzheimer's disease, that is. But there are many different things that can actually cause problems with our memory and thinking as well over time, and including excess alcohol. Back to the conversation we had before about is it okay to drink and how much is okay to drink? We know that people who have significant alcohol histories, can have an alcohol-related dementia because every time you drink, you kill off a few brain cells. Luckily, we have billions and billions of them. But if you drink excessively, for example, that can cause an alcohol-related dementia as well. So this is why we talk about dementia as an umbrella term. Alzheimer's disease is the most common form of dementia, but there are many different causes of dementia out there. And in many cases, people will have dementias that are caused by multiple things that we just talked about.
So what causes dementia then? You say multiple different types of things. And you can stay active, you can have good diet, you can have good health. Can you reverse dementia? Can you stop it from happening, or you slow down its occurrence?
Yeah, so again, there's some types of dementia that you just can't really do anything to slow it down, for example, or to manage it. So, for example, people who develop Parkinson's disease, sometimes they will end up developing dementia. And while you can treat the symptoms of Parkinson's disease, we can't really cure Parkinson's disease, and we can't necessarily prevent that progression to dementia. But there are other types of dementia that are actually preventable, and actually we can slow the progression of those things. So, for example, we talked about alcohol-related dementia. I have some people who are very, very heavy drinkers, for example, and they pickle their brains, for example, and they start developing signs of dementia. And I tell them, if you keep drinking at this pace, you're not going to be able to do much sooner. And often many of them will cut back significantly or just stop drinking altogether. And we might be able to stabilize things, or we might slow the gradual progression down. There are people we know who are at risk of vascular dementias. So vascular dementias are ones that are caused by the same things that can cause heart attacks and stroke. So if we know that they have high risk factors for heart attacks and strokes, if we can do things to prevent future strokes and heart attacks, like manage their cholesterol, manage their blood pressure, get them exercising, those sorts of things, that'll create a healthier heart, a healthier brain, and it'll help prevent a progression, or sometimes slow down that progression, of dementias as well. So there's some things that are what we call modifiable, and there are other things that aren't, for example, modifiable at all. And that's why we say that there are things we can actively do to prevent dementias in some cases, or actually slow down the progressions, depending on what types of dementias there are. And so that's why it's important to, again, work with your primary care provider to get a clear diagnosis. Because also sometimes people might come to me saying, my memory's not good. And indeed, there are problems with their memory, but there might be something that's not even related to a dementia. They might have anemia, for example. They might have a problem with their thyroid. They might have a vitamin deficiency, for example. They might have other certain things that or they might actually have a mood disorder like depression or anxiety. And when you actually figure out what those causes are and you can treat them, you often reverse those memory concerns, for example, which weren't dementia, but were other things that could look like dementia. That's why if anybody's concerned about their memory and thinking, they should see their primary care provider, get it, to figure out, is there something that's reversible here that's not even dementia? And if it is a type of dementia, are there things that I can do proactively to try and help further, prevent it from, progressing as quickly as it could otherwise, as well.
Tell me about Parkinson's. Is it the same as dementia and Alzheimer's? Is it different? I've heard numerous people that have gotten sort of early onset Parkinson's. There's more of that today. Tell me about Parkinson's, if you could.
Yeah, so Parkinson's disease is what we call a neurodegenerative condition. It's the specific part of the brain involved that controls what we call dopamine. And when you have too much dopamine in that part of the brain, that's what leads to things like schizophrenia, for example. When you have too little dopamine, it's what causes Parkinson's. You need dopamine as this kind of brain chemical, if you will, or what we call a neurotransmitter. You need that substance, for example, to help actually with our motor functioning as well. So people with Parkinson's, they often have a deficiency of dopamine, and there can be, various kind of specific causes, that are related to it. But in those individuals, for example, usually the treatment, not necessarily the cure, but a treatment for it, is by giving them medication that contains dopamine to try and raise those levels to help them with their motor functioning. But we know that that there's a subset of people who develop Parkinson's as a neurodegenerative condition that will subsequently also develop dementia as well. Some people have a dementia-related condition called dementia with Lewy bodies, where the first signs and symptoms might be memory and thinking problems that might have some specific characteristics like visual hallucinations. And later on, in the course of their disease, they might also start developing motor symptoms that are actually Parkinson's-like, and we call that dementia with Lewy bodies. And that's actually a Parkinson's that's kind of related to Parkinson's disease, but not necessarily Parkinson's disease. So the key thing with Parkinson's is it's a neurodegenerative condition. It can be associated with the later development of dementia. And there's also a dementia condition that can then lead to some physical findings that are very similar to Parkinson's disease. But again, think about dementia being a problem in the brain that can progress over time. And same with Parkinson's, it's a problem in a specific part of brain that will progress over time. And sometimes these things, when they impact similar parts of the brain, they can actually lead to other, similar things like Parkinson's symptoms or dementia-like symptoms as well. So that's why, again, it's really important to work with a primary care provider, a specialist provider, to try and figure out what's what, so that people can get accurate diagnoses, timely treatments and interventions to stay healthy and independent for as long as possible.
Are Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, dementia genetic?
There can be a genetic component. So again, if people have Parkinson's disease running in their family, for example, there's perhaps a higher risk of that. Dementias, though, the most common forms of dementia, like we discussed, Alzheimer's, dementia, etc., because we know that age is the number one risk factor associated. Some people say, oh, my grandfather had dementia, he was in his 80s, and my grandmother had dementia and she was in her 70s, for example. And so therefore, I must be at high risk of dementia. And we know that where we think about a genetic component is when we're talking about early onset dementias. So people developing dementias before their 60s, if you have history of that in your family, there might be a genetic component there that might be that might put you at higher risk. But when people often tell me they have a family history of dementia and they talk about relatives in their 70s, their 80s, their 90s, that's more of an age-related component. And it might also be related to some of those other things like vascular risk factors or other things that may not have been well treated as they could in the past. So it's important to understand kind of when did this occur? And again, talk to your family doctor, your primary care provider, or a specialist you're working with so they understand that, because then they can help figure out, is this a genetic component or is this more of a component related to age or other risk factors? And especially if they can be modifiable, then it's important to remember that there are things that you might be able to do if you have modifiable risk factors to help prevent the onset of dementia as well.
But if we're all living longer, then even if it is age related, we want to worry about it and do something about it. We're going to take a break for some messages and come back in just 2 minutes with Dr. Samir Sinha, the Director of Health Policy Research at the oh my gosh, which hospital is it again? The Mount Sinai
Health and
Mount Sinai Health Hospital,
University
Health Network, University Health Network, and also professor at University of Toronto. Stay with us, everyone. Back in 2 minutes. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. My guest tonight is Dr. Samir Sinha, who is the head of aging, of National Institute on Aging Issues at Mount Sinai University at the Health Institute in the Health Network in Toronto, also at the University of Toronto Medical School. He's a professor. Doctor, I got to ask you, in addition to dementia and Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, people complain a lot about arthritis, about diabetes, about prostate issues, about erectile dysfunction, cancer, obviously. Are all these age-related, or can we do something about them all?
Yeah. So again, I think it's important to always think about, what might be age related and what's not age related. So I think a lot of my older patients will say, is this a part of normal aging or is this not a part of normal aging? So I think, the way I like to think about it, as we get older, our bodies are, have had more experience or more mileage, as I like to say. So there could be some natural wear and tear that can occur. Our joints, have had more wear and tear over time, just like our cars, for example, get wear and tear over time. And so joints, might need to be better supported in that way. You might need to get a knee replacement or replacement part so you can keep moving as you usually did. But there are some things that, for example, as you get older, for example, these things can become more problematic. So you have an increased risk of cancer as you age because there's a more of a risk that, for example, that you'll have things that just will stop functioning well, for example, and you're at a higher risk for that. We know that as you get older, for example, you're at a higher risk of blood pressure, you're higher risk of developing arthritis, and so these are the things that can be age related, but they're not necessarily normal parts of aging. And so I think that's why it's really important to make sure that you're working with your primary care provider to say, what are the things that I'm supposed to be looking for at this age? There's certain cancers, for example, that we need to be more aware about. But then after a certain age, if you don't need any more screening because it's less likely that cancer will become an issue for you after a certain age, like after age 80. We know it's important for people to get vaccinations, especially as they're getting older, because that's going to keep their immune system strong because our immune system starts to weaken as we get older. And it's important to be screened for things like high blood pressure or other chronic illnesses that could develop and worsen with age. And if they are becoming a problem, it's to get on top of that. And again, if your joints are starting to become a bit problematic, you might need to be assessed to see whether you may be a good candidate for a knee replacement. So I wouldn't say think that just chalk up as people are experiencing health issues, oh, well, this is what happens as I get older, for example. I like to mention to people that Osteoporosis is not a normal, or brittle bone disease is not a normal part of aging. Incontinence, fecal or urinary, is not a normal part of aging. Dementia is not a normal part of aging, for example. And so this is why it's important to kind of, again, work with a primary care provider, tell them what you're experiencing, what's going on, so they can figure out, is this normal or abnormal? And are there things that you can do about it as well?
Are prostate problems and erectile dysfunction a normal part of aging, or you can do things to exercise or do something so you don't have those two issues?
Yeah, so like for example, like erectile dysfunction, can be something that becomes more problematic for older adults. And that's partly because again, part of the plumbing, the part of the blood, the things that can cause erectile dysfunction are if you have poor blood flow to your genital areas, for example, that might be because there's a buildup of cholesterol and you have high blood pressure, and that can damage the blood vessels, those delicate blood vessels as well. So that's why, again, maintaining good vascular health could actually prevent, erectile dysfunction from happening, for example. So that's an example of things that you can do. A healthy heart means a healthy brain, could be, a healthy, kind of sexual functioning as well. When it comes to prostates, we know that as we get older, men's prostates tend to enlarge. And then that, if they enlarge to a certain extent, that can cause urinary symptoms as well. But, if people have an enlarged prostate, for example, there are medications that we can give that can actually help shrink the prostate or better manage urinary flow so people don't have the negative symptoms that are associated with that as well. So again, it's why it's important to kind of understand there's sometimes things that we can actually treat, there's things that we can actually modify, so that people can still lead healthy and independent lives.
You were appointed as an expert lead of the Ontario Senior Strategy. What did you do on that? What were your recommendations?
Yeah, so this is back in 2012, over a decade ago, where I was asked by the Ministers of Health and Seniors for Ontario to really look at kind of aging in Ontario, and what the province could do to better be supported to meet the needs of its aging population. We came up with 166 recommendations, 33 that were focused beyond, for example, the Ministry of Health, and 133 that were focused on things that the Ministry of Health could actually do. And we made a whole bunch of recommendations, everything from starting to promote the creation of more what we call age-friendly communities, the idea of creating more what we call seniors active living centers, places where people could gather and socialize. We created things like free exercise and falls prevention classes across the province, to get people, doing things that could prevent falls and encourage more socialization. And then there were a number of things we did to try and improve the provision of primary care, such as the creation and supporting of more physician home visits for frail older adults. There was work done to improve what we're doing in our hospitals and our home and community care and long-term care systems. So it was a whole of government approach to try and do that. And then in 2017, we came up with a second Ontario senior strategy that really tried to build on some of the recommendations from the first strategy as well. So there's been a lot of little things that have happened that probably most people aren't even aware of. But I was really proud to be able to do that. But the bottom line is there's a lot more that we need to do as a province and as a country, and even in our own municipalities, to try and better support our aging populations. So by no means was it a one and done affair. There's a lot more work that needs to be done, and I'm constantly working as the Director of Health Policy Research at the National Institute on Aging to really try and help promote what is the good evidence that will help us all age better as a society.
Of the 160 or whatever recommendations, how many were implemented, do you think?
Well over 100, were
Well, that's
either
good.
fully implemented or partially implemented as well. So I was really proud to see that was, done. But again, those are recommendations that were made, for example, in 2012, for example. And as we kind of continue to age and we learn new things or we experience new things, there's things that we need to continue doing. So I never like to think of these things as, do it once and you have it all figured out. Managing the needs of an aging society is a continual work in progress and something that we need to continue to focus on, not only as individual municipalities, but our individual provinces and territories and our country as a whole. There's a lot more work to be done to make sure that we make Canada a better place to grow up and grow old in.
How do you find out? if you've got dementia? Is there a MRI that you can take? Is there a bunch of questions you ask, like concussion protocol? What is it that determines you actually have dementia?
So dementia is diagnosed as it's a clinical diagnosis. So it's not like you just do a scan or you do a memory quiz and you have your diagnosis. Because remember, there are many things that can mimic memory or thinking problems. If people have, anemia, or if they have thyroid problems, if they have vitamin deficiencies, if they have depression or anxiety, all those things can cause memory and thinking problems as well. So if someone's worried about their memory or thinking, it's good to make contact with a primary care provider or a specialist provider who can basically figure out, do some tests with you, and take a proper history, look at your blood work and then figure out what actually is going on. And as I said, sometimes you find that your memory and thinking problems have nothing to do with dementia. They have other things that are going on that can be treated, and need to be fixed. Other times, we find out, yeah, actually your symptoms are related to dementia, but it's not that you do a simple scan or you do a simple test, for example. It's what we call a clinical diagnosis, where you need to have a provider who looks at all the information together to basically figure out what exactly is going on.
So there's not like a segment of the brain that turns up a different color on an MRI.
No, certainly on some, if you do an MRI or a CT, for example, you might have findings that look or correlate with what we might see in a brain that has dementia. But again, when you actually, talk to the individual or do testing, you might find they might have things that look dementia-like, for example, but there's no evidence of dementia. And there are other people who might have a normal-looking brain scan, and they very much do have dementia. So again, brain scans, can be helpful. They can build more information or evidence to kind of tell us maybe what type of dementia is at play, or if dementia may be something to be considered from a brain scan point of view. But dementia, remember, is a clinical diagnosis. You need to work with a provider who takes all the information together. You can't just look at a picture, a scan. You can't just look at, put someone through a memory test. There's often a lot of different things that need to be considered before you make a significant diagnosis like that of dementia.
This has been a very interesting conversation. I really appreciate it. We're going to take a final break and come back with some concluding comments with our guest, Dr. Samir Sinha, in just 2 minutes. Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. My guest tonight is Dr. Samir Sinha. He is the Director of Geriatrics at Mount Sinai Health. He is at the University Health Network Hospitals in Toronto. He's the Peter and Sheila Godso Chair in Geriatrics at Mount Sinai Hospital. He is also an assistant professor at the University of Toronto Department of Medicine, Family and Community Medicine. He's also an assistant professor of medicine at Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine. I mentioned earlier that you were a Rhodes Scholar. I'm very jealous. What was it like going to Oxford, being a Rhodes Scholar?
It was one of the greatest experiences of my life. So I was very privileged to after my medical school at the University of Western Ontario, to go and spend 4 years at Oxford. That's where I was able to pursue a master's in what we call economic and social history, where I focused on medical history, and then I did a doctorate in sociology. And that's actually where I developed my love of geriatric medicine and caring for older adults. It was my mentor who said, for my master's in history, he said, you should look at the issues related to aging, because this is one of the greatest societal challenges we're going to face. So for my master's thesis, I actually looked at the history of care of older people in England, from the creation of their National Health Service to the present period, which at that time was the early 2000s. And then for my PhD work, I actually looked at how do you integrate health and social care services to provide good, high quality care for older adults that helps them stay healthy and independent in their own communities for as long as possible. So it was a huge opportunity for me to learn about what our aging population will need. And after, my time at Oxford, I was able to, to then specialize formally in geriatric medicine. And I continue to kind of apply a lot of those learnings from my time at Oxford into the current work that I'm doing today.
Tell me a little bit about your first day or first month at Oxford. What was it like being a Rhodes Scholar and walking into that that university that has such incredible history?
Yeah, it was honestly, it was a massive privilege. When, Oxford itself, if people haven't visited or been, it's a university, but it's made up of over 40 colleges. Some of the colleges go back to the medieval period, Middle Ages. My college, ironically, was called New College, but it was new in 1379 when it was founded. And so it was amazing that I was able to become a student there, and walk into these buildings that are still standing. They're all the original buildings that were built, have been standing for hundreds and hundreds of years. And around the corner was a graduate of my college, New College, had founded another college called All Souls College in 1431. And that's where I was asked to meet with my future mentor, Charles Webster, on my first day at Oxford. I go into his 15th century study. And he happened to be the official historian for the National Health Service. And that's where he sat me down and basically said, look, you're a bright guy. You've been doing medical school and all these things, but, what is it that you want to do? How do you want to make a difference? And he's the one who inspired me to start thinking about the needs of our aging population and focusing my work around that. But, it was also terrific because he had been at Oxford since 1969. He knew it inside and out. And he was able to make sure that I not only focused on my studies, but I also, was able to join the rowing team of my college. I was able to become the president of my college, and really just kind of have, a fun experience. And if people want to know what the experience was like a little bit, you just have to watch Harry Potter, because Harry Potter was filmed, at my college amongst others. And it was very much wearing gowns at dinner, having fun, and getting to meet really, really interesting people from all around the world. And it was really fun because at Oxford, nobody else was studying what I was studying at my own college. And it really forced you to kind of have really neat conversations with different people around you, getting you to open your perspectives and think about things in different ways. And I think that was the secret sauce that made it a really exciting place to be, and to learn at. So it was just a real magical place, and a real Hogwarts experience, if you will.
What a wonderful experience. Last question. You also had some time at Johns Hopkins in the United States. So you've seen the American medical system, the British medical system, and the Canadian medical system. Which one do you like the best?
There's things that I like about the British system in terms of how it's organized, in terms of primary care and other aspects. I think in some aspects, it's a much more well-organized system compared to the United States and Canada. But right now, it's grossly underfunded, and it's not being supported to do the work that it was really meant to do. I really, was intrigued by the American system because there were some of the best pieces of healthcare that you could get in the world, but there's also a lot of people who just don't have any access to healthcare in the United States. And so what the US taught me is a lot of some of the best things that could happen, but also a lot of the worst things that could happen in healthcare. And that's part of the reason why I landed back in Canada. I just really felt hopeful that in Canada, there's things that we can really learn and build on from the British system and the American system. But our system, has an opportunity to still deliver high quality care for older Canadians. We just need to make sure that our politicians don't meddle too much. They fund healthcare accordingly, and they really give the leadership that it needs so that we can really help people, grow up and grow old, and stay healthy and independent for as long as possible.
Dr. Samir Sinha, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it. So what I've taken from this is everything in moderation, no smoking, 14 glasses of wine a week. Am I allowed? Keep active, both physically as well as mentally, and plan for my financial situation in retirement.
You've got it. If you just do a few of those things really well, you're setting yourself for a lot more of a successful older age.
That's our show for tonight, everybody. Thank you for joining us. I remind you, I'm on every Monday through Friday at 6 o'clock on 960 AM. You can stream me online even from Oxford University at www.saga960am.ca. All my podcasts and videos go up on my website, briancrombie.com, and on social media and on podcast servers and on YouTube as soon as my radio show goes to air. Thanks for joining us. Doctor, this has been really interesting. I really appreciate it. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me, Brian.
Thank you.